Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bales.
I'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging the Gadigal peoples, who are one of the 29 tribes or clans that make up the Eora Nation. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We have never ceded our sovereignty as First Nations peoples living in this country, now known as Australia. And as you can see from the background, if you are tuning in by watching our YouTube channel, this is the Sydney Harbour and this is Gadigal country. So we're actually in Sydney as we're recording this podcast. I also just want to say really quickly for people that are watching the podcast, thank you so much for subscribing to our channel. It's still something that's quite new, doing the video as well as the audio. So I just want to say a big shout out or a special thank you for those that have supported me on this journey. This episode, I've got an amazing guest who's joining me. Kristal Kinsela is one of the leading, I would say, Indigenous women in business, but has an amazing business, which she's going to tell you all about. As we do for all of my guests, the guest introduces themselves. So I'm going to hand over to you, my sister. Can you share with our listeners, but also now our viewers on YouTube, tell us your name, your mob, and where you grew up?
Yeah, so my name's Kristal Kinsela. I'm a proud Jawoyn and Wiradjuri woman. I come from a matriarchal line, so my family dates back 5 generations to Pine Creek. My great-great-grandmother her name was Polly Peters, and she was born and grew up in Pine Creek, which is a little place outside Katherine in the Northern Territory. But I always acknowledge my grandfather's people, which are the Wiradjuri people. Pop was born in Condobolin in central western New South Wales, but he grew up in Gilgandra before making his way to Sydney. So I come from a really big Aboriginal family.
I could just imagine.
Yeah. My mum was one of 10. There were 8 girls, 2 boys. Well, I should say there still are 8 girls. Both my mum's brothers have now passed. So a really big family. And, you know, some of my most fondest memories are just being in my grandparents' house. So my family actually took some of the first Housing Commission houses out in Western Sydney. So I lived in Doonside, was born in Blacktown, and our house, we were the first people that lived in that Housing Commission house out there. And yeah, so I grew up most of my days on Darrick country in Western Sydney, and had lots and lots of cousins and family always around me. So I didn't meet my biological father until I was 18. So sometimes people say to me, you don't really look Aboriginal. You kind of look European or you look South American.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably because of my father's ancestry. So I met my dad when I was 18, and he has German and Swiss background. So
Can I ask a quick?
Yeah.
It might be a bit too personal. Because a lot of our mob that have been disconnected from family and community and culture, it's usually the Aboriginal side that they've been disconnected from. So you've been disconnected from the German side.
Yes.
How did you end up, because usually people go for a link up.
Yes.
And then they help find your family.
I know. And it is. I am quite opposite. So I think there was always just this sense of wanting to know who I was completely. And I think I was about 14 or 15 when I actually went to my mum and I said, I want to know who my dad is. And she was just like, this is too painful. This is too much. I forbid you for doing that. And so respectfully, I waited till I was 18. And so I had his name, and I was told that he worked at Long Bay Prison.
So you knew he was in Sydney?
I knew he was in Sydney.
Not on the other side of the world?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that he worked at Long Bay Prison. So I rang the jail.
I'm just looking for my dad. Not an inmate.
I know, which is, it is quite funny. So, I ring up Long Bay Prison and I said, yeah, I'm looking for my dad. His name's Roland Lang. And then, you know, so they put me through to some section that he worked in. And then someone said to me, oh, he's actually on leave. He's not here at the moment. Can I take a message? And I said, look, I'm his daughter. And this is my name and this is my number. And I didn't think about it for a while. And, you know, some months went past. And then I think it might have been the year after that finally I get this phone call one night and it's him. And he said, you know, my work's told me that you called the work. I'd really like to meet you.
So he obviously knew that you existed.
He did know I existed, yeah. But, you know, there's lots of stories, I guess, in why he wasn't part of my life. And that was just the start. So we agreed to meet, and that was a journey that I went on. So, you know, he's been part of my life for more than 20 years now. But do I think I'm German or I have that as part of my identity? Sometimes I do. I think that genetically I am. I have some characteristics of my father, but I've just grown up in rich Aboriginal culture, and that's what I know. And I think my environment
and
has so much more
to break out of that when you've grown up in a black family, a black household, and a black community. To then, I always think of for a lot of non-Indigenous Australians who find out their Aboriginality. Or, you know, my mother or grandmother or great-grandmother was Aboriginal, but really when it's usually the parent that's Aboriginal and they've lived their whole life thinking that they were, you know, just another white Australian, and then they find out they're Aboriginal and all of a sudden they got this big family and community that they belong to. I always think about what that would be like to kind of walk in to like a black community, never been there, never socialised with black fellas before, and go, okay, so this is my family. How to accept that? Like it always, I think about it, how challenging it would be because we're different. Very different in good and bad ways, right? Our moms and our families, we've got big families. And you said that your mum was one of 8, or your grandmother?
Oh, yeah, my mum was one of 10.
10?
So, yes.
And then all of your cousins, your aunties and uncles, their kids, their partners, and then their kids. Like there's big mobs when you just imagine a homecoming and you were used to growing up with just your mother and father and maybe one sibling. Because that's a lot of, you know, mainstream Australian households. A lot of them are just mum and dad and a few siblings. Or we're like, oh, no. There's 21 of us that live in our house. And I know a lot of mobs say the same thing. Oh, did you grow up in a house where you slept on the floor too? Mattresses everywhere. So the German ancestry is something that you acknowledge it. Are you into any of German food? Like, I'll tell you one thing. That sausage, right?
The bratwurst.
I love sauerkraut. Is it sauerkraut?
Yes.
I love that. I love it on everything. But the sausage, maybe because we grew up, believe it or not, we grew up down here, Redfern, Waterloo, and we weren't meat eaters. My mum was like a vegetarian.
Oh, wow,
Very rarely did we eat meat. So, eating a sausage like at the Sunday markets, we were there just the other day, and I'm like, no, it's not something I want to eat at 8 a.m. But the lineup for that, do you get into any German food?
I have at times, but not really. So, I mean, the few times I've sort of gone and celebrated Christmas or special events, my dad's mother, my Oma, she's in her 80s now, but she's an amazing cook and, you know, has always prepared different sorts of dishes and things like that. She's
Is she in Sydney as well?
She's in Sydney as well. She makes an amazing sort of Black Forest cake but I don't know. It's
just different.
It is
different. Mob, different culture.
Different culture and it was really quite confronting because their worldview and my worldview are very different. And the family size is very different. So, I mean, I still to this day, if I talk about extended family members, it's almost like I need to write it down on a piece of paper. Because in Australia, my father only has a brother and his mother and a niece and nephew. Everybody else is back in Germany, as a brother in Germany, in Berlin.
So you got mob overseas.
I have more overseas.
Have you met any of them?
Yeah, I have. So my dad's brother, Harry, he's actually a partner in EY in Berlin. So I've had many conversations because he was really proud of me when I finished my MBA this year, and he sent me a note, and at times, I've been able to have some yarns with him, and I've met some of his children. But some of the other extended family, not so much.
Yeah. I was just going to say, this yarn reminds me of the conversation that I had with Anita Heiss.
Yeah.
So big shout out, sis, if you're listening or watching. But Anita's dad met her mum. He couldn't speak any English. Yeah. But just imagine back in those days, as a Koori woman, I'm pretty sure he's Austrian. She says, I'm pretty sure I'm remembering our yarn now. And you can imagine the brothers, the cousins and the uncles with Anita's mum, just thinking, who's this fella? And there is that kind of, know, in our communities, it's kind of, you kind of stick to your own.
Yeah.
So your mum had a child to a German man. Have you got any siblings?
I have, I do. So I'm the only child of my parents.
Yeah.
But my mum has another daughter. So I've got an older sister, Leanne. She's 6 years older than me. Mm-hmm. And then my dad has 3 children. So Alex, Rebecca are twins, and Richard.
So when you normally say how many siblings you have, what do you say? I've got 5?
There's 5. I've got 4. There's 5 of us. I do, yeah.
You don't get into the breaking down on who's got the same mum and dad.
No, I think it's irrelevant, right?
Yes.
If they're your brother, your sister, then they're
that's how we've grown up, right? No one's ever said, no, that's your half brother.
No.
And to me, I always say to my kids, because, I've got Jida, Lameki and Tiger Lily, and my husband, Peace, had 2 children when we met. So Garland and Kasaya, even though their mother's a Quandamooka woman from Minjuraba, they've been in my life since they were 3 and 7 years old. So I claim them as mine, but I always say I gave birth to 3, but I got 5 children. So having a blended family, there's 5 kids, and I know you've got a couple.
I've got a blended family. I have a tribe as well. So I have 6, 3 that I've birthed and 3 that I've have been brought into my life through marriage.
Yeah.
So my eldest, Jada's 23, and I've been in her life since
You've got a Jada.
I have a Jada.
I've got a Jada, yeah.
And I've been in her life since she was 4 years old, and she's just, going from strength to strength. And then in my second marriage, I've got Ocean and Summer, who both are living in New Zealand, that are 19 and 18. Wow. Which is great. Yeah.
And then your little one.
And then
you got 2 little ones.
So my 3.
3 big ones, 3 little ones.
So my 3, well, they're not that little. So I had the big gap, 12 years. What was I thinking? So I've got 17, 15, and then the little one's 4 now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I saw recently the little one, or were the 3 of them in New Zealand?
I had the 2 boys.
The 2 boys
were in New Zealand.
Yeah. And you were overseas.
I was.
You've got to share this with me. Well, first, before we get to where you've just come back from, I first met you, and I still remember it clear as day. It was my first ever Supply Nation. It was a Christmas networking party, event, and it was at Accenture.
Yes.
You, I think, was you working with Supply Nation at the time?
I was working at Supply Nation. So
and what was your role there?
I had a couple of roles. So I went there as a program manager, because I've got a training and development background. Yeah. And then I left. When I left, I was the relationships and engagement manager, so working with the membership team.
Okay.
Which is really good.
So for people that don't know Supply Nation, can you give us a bit of a background?
Yeah.
What Supply Nation is, who they are?
Yeah, so Supply Nation is the peak body for certifying Indigenous businesses in Australia. They've been around since 2009. They were modelled off a US model, the NMSDC, and have, I guess, played a really crucial role over the last 12 years in trying to, stir up the supply in Indigenous businesses, but also get the members ready, the buyers ready to be able to do business with Indigenous businesses. So,
and some of the members are, just for example?
Well, they've got most of the big banks, most of corporate Australia. You think about Qantas, you think about,
yeah, all the big ones,
all the big ones, Accenture, all of the big Woolworths,
So anyone can kind of become a member of Supply Nation.
Yes.
And the certification is for Indigenous businesses that are at least 51% or more owned by the Indigenous partner.
Yes, so they now have two verification models. So the certification, as you've just said, 51% owned, managed, control, but they also have the 50%, which is registered category. So two categories of assurance that you're doing business with an Indigenous business. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do your own due diligence.
That's exactly what I say to people all the time. Still do, at Black Card, we've got this activity.
Yeah.
It's all about, who are you, not what do you do.
Yeah.
And through that, getting to know people, you would know whether or not you're dealing with an Indigenous person.
That's right.
People always say to me, well, how do you ask that question in a business meeting?
Yeah.
If you're going to do business with an Indigenous business or look at the potential of doing business with them, well, you need to find out whether or not they are Indigenous. Yeah. And people are like, but they're Supply Nation certified. And I suggest they could be Supply Nation certified. But there has been a few examples of businesses that may have an Indigenous partner, but whether or not the Indigenous partner has anything to do with the operations of the business. So you've got a book based on procurement, supplier diversity.
Yes.
What inspired you to actually want to publish a book?
It's a good question. So I've got to sort of take you back a little journey, but it was 2016 and I'd only been in business for maybe over 18 months. And I was working on a job in Queensland and I met a lady and her name is Diane Burgess. And we were both working on a job together, facilitating for a Family Matters forum. And she said to me, can I have your address? And she posted me some books. And one of the books that she posted me was a book she'd written, which was called How to Bake a Book. And she's like, let me know if you want to have a yarn about this book. And so I had a yarn to her and she goes, I bet you've got a book in you. I'm sure there's a book. Like, use my book as the guide to help you to create your own book. Everybody has a book in them. And so we fumbled around, on email, tic-tacking, and I kind of just took a step back and I went, you know what? There's actually no literature in Australia on doing business with Indigenous businesses. We've been modelled off a US model here. Supply Nation's been modelled off a US model. We see everything that we see online literature it's US centric. It doesn't speak to what's happening in our Australian context. So I was like, there's got to be a book about Indigenous business procurement here. But what happens? My life takes over and I couldn't put any further energy into that idea. So I just parked it. And it wasn't till I was pregnant and about to go off on maternity leave that I started thinking about this book. And so in my maternity leave, I started working with Diane and scoping out what the book's going to look like. And I engaged her as a book coach. And when I came back on deck at the start of 2019, I knew the Supply Nation Connect conference was May. And so I'm like, it's January, May. I want to launch my book in May. What pressure can you put on yourself?
5 months. So Connect is like the largest gathering of Indigenous businesses in the country.
Yes.
As well as every procurement professional officer that comes to do business and to kind of, they're staking out who's doing what and building those relationships. So, you wanted to launch the book there.
I wanted to launch the book, but everyone was like, you are absolutely mad. You have a 3-month-old baby.
So you just had a baby.
3-month-old baby. You've got 5 months to not only write the book, edit the book, and take it to publish and launch it.
And I was like, of course you did it.
Well, of course I did. Of course I did because, I don't know, I think when I set a goal, I'm going to work towards, I'm going to work my ass off. And look, it wasn't easy. There was a lot of stressful moments, but I just knew that there was a gap in our marketplace that needed to be filled. Yeah. And I knew that I was the right authority to write that guide, to help, because to me, it was like an instrument that was going to help bring the supply and the demand together to really help from an Indigenous voice, the lessons or the guidance that needed to happen to help blackfellas do more business with corporate Australia.
And for corporate Australia and other businesses to have the confidence and the knowledge and the know-how, because the book, now the second edition, like I read it on the plane, and I remember taking a photo and I sent it to you, and I'm like, I'm reading this and I'm going to share this with every single client that I deliver black card to. I remember telling my team of facilitators, this is not our area of expertise. Yeah. So we just need to say there are people out there that can support you. And Kristal, seriously, sis, I have not come across another, like you said, there's no literature.
No.
That actually, and simple to read, easy to read, but quite in depth.
Yeah.
The checklist around how do you engage with Indigenous business.
Yeah.
Then about procurement, and then kind of looking at your internal, looking in your, the back of house before you go out and start engaging.
Yeah.
Make sure you've got X, Y, and Z, kind of. Yeah. You've got the funding. Have you got a budget? Like, I'm looking at all this and I'm like, okay, so this really is a simple book to pick up, to read it, and to be able to now I need to do this before I come and engage with you. So for people that are listening, you're on your second edition now.
Yes.
What's the difference between the first and the second edition?
Yeah. So last year I went through a huge moment. I left a hugely successful business, kind of, in the second year of a global pandemic, which is sometimes people go, that again is another crazy thing to do, that you would leave a business that's survived a pandemic, is going from strength to strength, that you've been there since its inception, to go out on your own. Are you mad? And
especially when you've got 6 kids. Yes. Like there's some serious bills.
I know. And I was like, no, it just feels like the right thing to do. So the second edition was about me rebranding to my own brand, to me as Kristal Kinsela Consulting. But it was also that a lot changes in our market space. And so there were updates that were really necessary to what's happening, from the Indigenous procurement policy to the introduction of another council in New Zealand, Amatai, to more literature around black cladding and some of the issues that are really prevalent and are concerning for black fellas in business. And so it just felt really timely to go, this will be, part of this relaunch of Kristal Kinsela as a name, as a brand, but also as a company.
And are you proud of the book that you've published?
I'm sincerely proud because that's my legacy, right?
So it's your life's work, and you're not that old.
No.
It's the first book.
There'll be a memoir down the track.
I was thinking the same thing. Like, that's the first book, and you've kind of put all of your knowledge, your experience, and you've packaged that up. Like I said, I'm not a book reader, but I buy books.
Yes.
I got every book you want, right? But I don't really read them all. So when I picked yours up, I'm like, this is something right now that a lot of people that are doing cultural capability training, you could call it cultural awareness training, whatever you want to call it, they want to know about their Indigenous procurement policy. Yeah. What is the IPP? And yes, I have a reconciliation action plan. I have a procurement target, but I'm not too sure where to start. Yeah. I need, as a facilitator, I need to be able to say, this is who's in this space. Go and engage with them. Or I can at least say, well, the Indigenous procurement policy comes from the Commonwealth. It is a mandate. Yeah. At least know the basics, and then say, if you want to learn more, go and buy this book. Yeah. So I don't know too much about the IPP, mainly because I've never had to tender.
Yeah.
So if you're an Indigenous business and you've never had to tender, then the IPP doesn't really impact us, right?
That's right.
Tell me, in terms of an Indigenous business that relies on tendering, and we're talking about, in Australia, for people that are listening overseas, for businesses, Indigenous businesses that are tendering, it's a competitive process. The term black cladding, you just mentioned it before, and it's a term that I'm familiar with. Can you just share some examples, or just what are some of the challenges that we're currently facing as a sector of Indigenous businesses?
Well, I think you've got to think about why there is an Indigenous procurement policy is the first sort of thing. And you think about the government and its treatment of its First Peoples in this country and the successive policies that have impacted us, it's up to them to really try to help be part of the solution moving forward. They have huge purchasing power. The Commonwealth Government spends $50 billion a year. If they're going to spend that kind of money, why not spend it with an Indigenous business, is what I reckon. And so they have that kind of power. So the idea behind the IPP is around economic development, the growth of the Indigenous business sector, which will then have a flow-on effect, self-determination, positive impacts, great role models, employment, all of those sorts of benefits.
Breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty and creating intergenerational wealth. Yes.
100%. So if you think about that in the sense of its why, black cladding is in the absolute opposite of that. It's where a person or people are fraudulently proclaiming that they are a genuine Indigenous business for commercial gain. And it defeats this whole purpose because, their starting line might not be the same as actual First Nations people who have had to go the hard yards to kind of get anywhere.
Oh, still not there yet to be able to participate at that level.
That's right.
And yet they're there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's black cladding too is not just something that we face. So, you mentioned before, I've just come back from overseas, just come back from Colombia and from New Orleans. And, I heard some different terms over there. So like rent-a-feather is another one. Rent-a-feather was shared with me from some of our Native American brothers and sisters that said, we don't say black cladding, we say rent-a-feather. They're renting a red feather.
Oh my God, stop it. Rent-a-feather.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that you got mob on the other side of the world that have the same kind of challenges or issues that we're facing?
Yeah.
What was the purpose of your latest trip? Because I know you get around. I see every now and again, and every year, I know you've been part of that. Is it a delegation that usually goes overseas and is part of the kind of, minority businesses, the big expo that happens at different places around the US?
Yeah.
So what was this trip?
So I was part of, it was one trip combined, but it was two separate events. And so the first event, I travelled to Colombia to the World Indigenous Business Forum, which I have to say was truly a really life-changing moment for me, a very humbling experience. So in Colombia, there are more than 2 million Indigenous people that represent more than 60 different groups. And, Colombia is a very, very poor and disadvantaged country. And my heart just broke for First Nations people there who have growing businesses and growing economies, but really struggle. They don't have the same advantages as what we have. They don't have a government with procurement policies or major corporates that are trying to develop or do business with them. And so it just really shone a light on their plight and their experiences and made me really reflect on some of the privilege that we do have here, even though we've been through a lot in Australia. So that was my first experience. I was a speaker at that event with my good friend David Williams, and we just talked about what we've been doing from a culture, storytelling, creativity and procurement perspective, and the work that we've been doing with corporates here in Australia. But from there we went to New Orleans on a sort of separate event, which was to the 50th anniversary of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, which I said earlier, the NMSDC, which Supply Nation was modelled off. And so that was a pretty monumental moment because 50 years of supply diversity in the United States and how that has had an impact on us here in Australia. So we've had supply diversity in Australia for 12 years. And just to kind of, I guess, to share in that moment, this time around for me was a very different experience, and that's because Supply Nation had been on a delegation that had brought them to New Orleans with First Nation Native American people and businesses and associations. And so hearing more of their narrative and their story as well, and what's happening from their experience, from challenges around their denial of being certified because, you know, how Native American are they?
Yeah, they've got a different system. We've got the confirmation of Aboriginality forms or a stat deck.
Yes.
Which that's a bit kind of, that's to me a stat deck. Go to a JP and tell them that you're an Aboriginal person. And that's the kind of people that are getting away with that cultural fraud or identity fraud. Yeah. So they've got some similar issues around being denied their, you could call it their indigeneity.
Yeah, so they're so much as being asked for DNA to prove blood quantums.
Oh, stop.
I know.
We're not there yet, and thank God.
I know, it's a scary thought. Like,
we're not there. And I love the fact that, you know, we are growing at twice the rate than the mainstream Australian kind of business sector. Yeah. And we make up, I've got to get this right, 0.06% of the 2 million Australian businesses. And the social return for every dollar spent. Now, this is what I learnt in your book. I'm telling your story.
Yeah, that's good. That
means you tell us.
Yeah, well, for every dollar you spend, you create $4.41 of social value. And so you might go, well, what does that social value, translate into? It translates into true self-determination. It translates into generational wealth, to employment, to training, to role models. And all of those things have a flow-on impact to health, well-being, and good community outcomes.
And that's what we're trying to do.
That is what we're trying to do.
Here we are, all 3% of us, because people need to realise that, Indigenous Australians make up 3% of the population, and 50% of our population are under the age of 25 and 40% are under the age of 15. A third of our population are enrolled in school. Yeah. So then you look at the older population over the age of 18, and we've got the prison demographics. We are the most incarcerated people on the planet. We make up 30% of the prison population. Mm. I'm trying to paint a picture to people that are either listening or watching that there's not many of us left. When you take the children out, in terms of the large proportion of our population are children, then the people that are actually sitting in prison, and then when you look at life expectancy, the median age, and I share this at Black Card, for Aboriginal people in a community called Wilkenya in in New South Wales is 39. So, we live, we don't live as long as non-Indigenous Australians and deal with a lot of health issues. So business to me is a way of breaking the cycle, the poverty cycle, and being able to work for ourselves, but also to be able to give back to our community. So this is out of your book. An Indigenous business is 100 times more likely to employ an Indigenous person and 100 times more likely to retain them. They are. If that, to me, that's creating social impact. It's creating it's a direct contribution to our society by doing business with Indigenous businesses. It's not all about employment. If your organisation's not ready for, employment of more Indigenous people coming through your doors, well, think about your supply chain. How many Indigenous suppliers are in your supply chain, or how much money do you spend with Indigenous businesses? And there's some questions that Kristal in her book gets you to reflect on. So if there's any kind of, words of wisdom that you'd love to share for anyone, especially corporate Australia that's listening or watching this podcast, and whether it's around supplier diversity, whether it's around your book, or just some advice that you'd like to share, because you do a few things. You've got a book, you've got your own consulting, you do unconscious bias training, but you also have a workshop around Indigenous procurement.
I do, yes.
All right. So you can talk yourself up.
Yeah, look.
Tell them what you do, how to get in contact with you.
Yeah. Look, I think the first thing is that we all buy things. As consumers, as people, as human beings, we all buy stuff. And what I ask you to do is just, the next time you need to buy anything, can you consider whether or not an Indigenous business sells that? Do they sell it as a service? Do they sell it as a product? And have a look around. Supply Nation does have the largest online directory that is publicly available for you to look at. Go and have a look. You would be really, really surprised at the diversity and the range and the quality of Indigenous businesses out there. And so, next time you've got to buy a gift for somebody, could an Indigenous business, have a great product that you could buy? Next time you need to get some home maintenance, is there a facilities maintenance Indigenous business that could help you out? Mm-hmm. Any law services? There are a lot of
Everyone needs a
legals.
lawyer.
Everyone does.
Every business needs a lawyer. Every business needs an accountant.
Yes.
PR people.
Yes.
Social media.
Yeah.
IT.
Yeah.
Anything. Creative communications. I was looking at Supply Nation's app for Connect. So if you haven't heard of the Connect conference, look up Supply Nation and get to the event next year in May. Yeah. I looked at the app last night on the plane coming down and I started screenshotting every business that I didn't get a chance to meet.
Yeah.
Geotechnology. And I'm like, geotechnology, that's interesting. I'm going to look them up. So you've got all different sectors, right? You've got the mining and resources sector. You've got the consulting, professional services, education. You've got training, stationery. I know Muru. Yeah. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yeah.
Brother Ross. Now I'm thinking, Mitch.
Brother Ross.
Mitch, me and him are going to have a yarn on this podcast soon. He literally supplies the Commonwealth Bank. Yes. Imagine supplying the Commonwealth Bank with stationery.
I know.
So we don't just do Aboriginal products or Aboriginal services. A lot of people go, oh, yeah, Aboriginal businesses must be something to do with Aboriginal art or native foods and stuff. There's a whole lot of things that you can, find that an Aboriginal person does, or, touch on to people as well. To find you online, you just go to your website.
Just look up, put Kristal Kinsela into Dr. Google and you'll find me. I will pop up.
And LinkedIn as well.
And I'm on LinkedIn. So.
And you've got a YouTube channel.
I do have a YouTube channel. Yeah, we should plug that.
Yes, please.
Follow my YouTube channel. Look, I created the channel because I wanted to get bite-sized chunks of information out about, some of the core topics or core questions that I answer within my book. But then it started to evolve also into a little bit of a meet and greet Q&A series as well. So I've got a series called Meet the Mob. I'd love for you to tune in. But that's my way of kind of introducing a new Indigenous business to people out there that might be considering buying from an Indigenous business.
There you go. So hit Kristal up, get on YouTube, go on LinkedIn, follow her. And I just got to say one more thing. I was actually a guest on Kristal's YouTube channel and a sister from Aotearoa reached out to me and said, I just watched you and Kristal and I've hit you up on LinkedIn. We had a virtual meeting the other day.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
Literally, we're going to connect next time. We didn't connect this time because our diaries just did not align. But from that yarn, someone in Aotearoa reached out to me and now we're going to potentially do business. So thank you for having me on.
That's what it's all about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You gave me, a space on your platform and I've been trying to lock you down for over a year. So I was trying to get in first. But I just want to say, to have you down here in Sydney, I know you're shooting back. We're going to the airport, so we have to run like literally. But just to have you for the half a day to come and actually see what I do and then to jump on my podcast, I just want to say thank you.
Oh, thanks,
and I just can't wait. Like next year, 2023, some big things are happening and I just want people to know that Indigenous businesses is where it's at. So support us, get behind us, buy Kristal's book and stay tuned. Listen to her podcast or it's a YouTube channel. I've told her she needs to have a podcast as well. But don't be afraid to yell out. That's what we're here for. And most people say to me after listening to this podcast that they've reached out to people on LinkedIn and they wouldn't have known that they existed if they didn't hear them on the podcast. So I know you're already a household name. Most businesses know Kristal, but if you haven't heard of this powerhouse of a woman, and make sure that you make yourself known. Not only organisations that have reconciliation action plans know about Indigenous procurement, there's a lot of organisations out there that are on their journeys. So, yeah, reach out to us, reach out to her. That's not my area, but I might be able to support you, and holler. And if there's anyone that's listening that knows of an Indigenous business that would love to get them on this podcast, I am more than happy to have a yarn. So you can kind of DM us on our Instas, get on LinkedIn, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the Black Magic Woman YouTube channel, then please do so. So on that note, I'm going to say until next time, bye for now, and thank you.
Thank you.
Don't forget to follow Black Magic Woman podcast on all social media platforms. To keep up to date with the latest episodes and news, head to blackmagicwoman.com.au. You can rate and review the podcast on iTunes, and please feel free to share the podcast with your family and friends.